Hey there. Welcome back to another historical bedtime horror story you didn't ask for. Tonight, we're diving into a life so lonely, so stigmatized, and so depressingly misunderstood that it might just make you grateful for your health insurance and the fact that your neighbors don't run at the sight of your face. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Let your room go quiet. Wrap yourself in a blanket that hopefully isn't made of wool stolen from a condemned monk, and take a deep breath. Because you, my friend, have just been diagnosed with medieval leprosy. Or rather, you will be. Soon. Because right now, you're just a peasant. A completely average human in a completely unremarkable part of 13th century Europe. You work the land. You say your prayers. You eat more turnips than any modern human would deem reasonable. Your back hurts. Your hands are calloused. Your life is brutally hard, but not unusually so. Then one morning, as you're washing in the icy trickle of a stream that everyone calls holy, but still smells vaguely of goat, you notice something weird. A patch of your skin is numb. Not painful. Not swollen. Just weirdly blank. You stab it with a thorn, no reaction. You poke it with a fingernail, nothing. Not even a twitch. Odd. But you're a medieval peasant, not a hypochondriac with WebMD access, so you carry on. But then the numbness spreads. A few weeks later, your eyebrows start thinning. Your skin flakes. You start to look different. And people notice. They don't say anything at first. Not directly. They just stop handing you bread like they used to. They pull their children closer at church. They start crossing themselves with more enthusiasm when you sneeze. Eventually someone says it. Just one word, whispered in a tone that makes your stomach turn. Leper. In today's world, the word leprosy means Hansen's disease, a slow, bacterial infection that damages nerves and skin. It's treatable with antibiotics and doesn't even spread easily. But back then, it wasn't just a disease. It was a verdict. A divine punishment. A living death sentence. A spiritual black mark so damning that even the rats kept their distance. And the church, the church had rules. Because once someone suspected you had leprosy, you weren't sent to a doctor. You were summoned to a priest. Not for healing. For judgment. So here you are, kneeling before a priest who's inspecting your face like he's picking out rotten apples at a market stall. He brings a little candle close to your nose. You don't flinch. He frowns. He checks your hands, your arms, the soles of your feet. Your skin's discolored in places. Cracked in others. You feel fine, mostly. Just numb. But none of that matters. Because leprosy isn't diagnosed through science. It's diagnosed through scripture. Through appearances. Through fear. And when the priest steps back and makes the sign of the cross, you already know the words before he says them. You are a leper! Now brace yourself. Because things are about to get dramatically worse. First, there's the ceremony. Yes. There's a full religious service for your removal. It's called the Mass of Separation. And no, it's not optional. You are summoned in your ragged tunic, your patchy skin on display, and made to kneel while the priest announces your spiritual death. You are, effectively, being buried alive. Spiritually. Socially. In every way that matters, you no longer count as a person. You're given a rough cloak, often dyed black or gray. Not for comfort, so people can see you coming. You're handed a wooden clapper or a small bell. This is now your voice. You must ring it whenever you approach, to warn others of your presence. Because if they don't hear you coming, they might accidentally breathe your air. And that simply won't do. But you're not allowed to return. Not even to die. Because lepers do not die at home. They die outside the gates. And they are buried, if at all, far from the churchyard. Sometimes there's no marker. No prayer. Just a shallow grave and a town that's relieved to have one less mouth to ignore. And you? You don't blame them. That's the real cruelty of it. You've been told so many times that you're cursed, you start to believe it. You thank them for scraps. You pray for the strength to stop hoping. You dream of your own funeral, and it's always empty. Because being a medieval leper isn't just about disease. It's about disappearing. Slowly. Painfully. With full permission from everyone you ever loved. So, you've been exiled. You were declared spiritually dead by a man in robes, given a cloak that marks you like a walking caution sign, and now you live on the edge of town, or the edge of the woods, somewhere between forgotten and feared. But here's the thing. Being a medieval leper isn't just about physical isolation. It's about the ritual humiliation that follows you like a shadow. A shadow with a clapper and an odor. Let's talk about the bell. Yes, that bell. The one they handed you after the priest pronounced you unclean. The one you're now required to carry with you at all times. The medieval equivalent of a siren, but somehow more pathetic. You're not allowed to be silent. Not in public. If you're approaching a road, you ring the bell. If you're walking near a town gate, you ring the bell. If you so much as come within earshot of someone who hasn't been officially diagnosed with terminal damnation, you ring the bell. Not to ask for help. Not to warn of danger. But to announce that you specifically, are the danger. It doesn't matter if your skin's clear today. It doesn't matter if you've done nothing wrong. In fact, you could be feeling better than ever. But the moment that bell jingles, people scatter like pigeons before a broom. Mothers pull their children away. Priests cross themselves mid-sermon. Vendors turn their stalls around like they're trying to deny reality through creative carpentry. And you? You keep walking. You ring the bell. And you keep walking. Sometimes you're allowed to carry a wooden clapper instead. A small block of wood that makes a sound somewhere between a knock and a dying cough. It doesn't ring, it clicks, and it's somehow even sadder. Like a last, lonely round of applause for the life you once had. And no, it doesn't matter if you've never harmed a soul. Doesn't matter if you're generous, kind, or the best storyteller in the region. Because the clapper tells people everything they need to know. Unclean. Stay back. Curse inbound. Now let's talk about food. Because while your social life is officially over, your digestive system didn't get the memo. You still get hungry. You still need to eat. And unfortunately, leprosy doesn't come with a meal plan. So you beg. Not like a regular beggar. No, that would be too human. You're required to beg differently. You must kneel. You must not speak. You ring your bell or clap your clapper and lower your eyes. Your face must be partially covered, usually by a piece of cloth, so the good people of Christendom don't have to look directly at your sin. The town, if it's feeling particularly saintly that day, might leave out scraps for you. Not hand them to you. That would involve touching something you might touch, Instead, they'll set down some bread, walk away, and nod at you like you're a stray dog they're trying not to bond with. And God help you if you touch anything in a market stall by accident. One brush of your cursed hand, and that entire table of apples is going into the ditch. You start to notice how differently people react to you now. When you were just a poor peasant, they might have looked down on you, sure, but they didn't recoil. Now you're not even poor. You're untouchable. And not in the cool mafia movie way. You're the embodiment of everything people fear but can't explain. Divine punishment, moral failure, human decay made visible. Your breath is suspicious. Your presence offensive. Your footsteps watched. You might think, surely not everyone reacts this way. But the truth is, they do. Because fear is contagious. And in medieval Europe, fear wasn't just an emotion, it was doctrine. Even the laws agree with them. In many towns, there were actual regulations on how you, the leper, were allowed to exist in proximity to others. Some places enforced a minimum distance, 6 feet, 10 feet, sometimes more. Sound familiar? Except, in your case, there's no return to normal after a couple of quarantines and a booster shot. This is it. Your forever is 6 feet behind everyone else's life. And if you do accidentally come too close, if your foot crosses the line at the market, or you step into a church courtyard without express permission, things can get violent. People will shout. Some might throw stones. Others might summon a priest or the town guard. Not to kill you. Killing a leper was technically a sin, but to make sure you know what you are. Unwelcome. Unholy. Unseen, except as a warning. And here's a fun detail. You don't even get to dress like everyone else anymore. Leper clothing had its own style. Not stylish, of course. More like unmistakable. Rough wool cloaks in somber colors, gray, black, dark brown. Some towns required you to wear a patch of cloth shaped like a cross, sewn right over your heart, as if to say, "Yes, I'm already judged." Others made lepers wear hoods, low, drooping hoods that obscured the face, both to protect others from the sight of you and to protect you from the sight of their horror. Your shoes might be deliberately mismatched or crudely made, so even your footprints are a signature of shame. And gloves? Not for warmth. They're to cover the signs of your rot. Because God forbid someone glimpses your fingers and loses their appetite. And what if, just what if, you're not sure you even have leprosy? What if the patch on your arm was just eczema? What if the numbness was temporary? What if the diagnosis was wrong? Too bad. Because once you're labeled a leper, that label doesn't peel off. There were no appeals courts for skin diseases. No second opinions. You're not in a medical system. You're in a morality play, and your role has been cast. But here's where it gets especially twisted. Because the very same people who reject you, they also need you. Leper houses were often named in honor of saints, funded by local parishes, given a small trickle of alms from the town's wealthier families, not out of compassion, but out of fear for themselves. Because ignoring lepers entirely? That might make God angry. And if there's one thing medieval towns fear more than disease, it's divine wrath. So they keep you close, but not too close. They feed you, barely. They let you exist, begrudgingly. And every time a pious noble donates a crust of bread or a scrap of land to your leper colony, they expect you to be grateful. You, the person who was just exiled, marked, and publicly condemned, are now expected to say thank you. Because they gave you what? A tent? A turnip? A plot of dirt next to the woods? How generous. And yet, you are grateful. Not because you're weak. Because when your world has shrunk to a bell, a cloak, and a hut in the trees, the smallest kindness can feel like a miracle. A loaf of bread left anonymously on a stone. A child who doesn't run when they see you, just stares. A priest who blesses you from a distance, not with fear, but with sorrow in his eyes. It's not much, but it's all you've got. And you learn to live on almost nothing. You also learn to hide. Because as much as you're required to be visible, to ring your bell, to show your marks, you also develop a deep, involuntary skill, invisibility. Not literal, of course, but emotional, spiritual. You start walking differently, quieter steps, gentler presence. You keep your hood down, your eyes low, your breath shallow. You learn to read the signs in people's faces before they even speak. The moment they notice your cloak, you're already backing away. Because humiliation isn't just the ritual. It's the routine. It's knowing, deep down, that every moment you exist in public is a moment someone else feels they need to be protected from you. And over time, you agree with them. So you sit by the road. Your clapper in one hand. Your eyes on the dust. And you wait. Not for healing. Not for mercy. Just for the day to end without someone spitting in your direction. And when someone leaves out bread, you crawl forward. You take it. You mumble a prayer. And you retreat. Because you've learned the hard way. In medieval Europe, shame wasn't a side effect of leprosy. It was the treatment. Welcome to your new home, far away, falling apart, and not really yours. So, you've been branded, exiled, and now you carry a bell that says, "Please notice me, but only enough to avoid me." You've said goodbye to your family, though not really. There was no embrace. No last dinner. Just a slow, uncomfortable shuffle backward, like the whole town suddenly discovered you were contagious and radioactive. Which, to be fair, is exactly what they believe. Now it's time to go home. Except, you don't have one anymore. Because medieval lepers don't live in towns. They live next to them. Sort of. Kind of. Not too close, though. Close enough to collect the breadcrumbs of charity. Far enough to never touch anyone again. You've officially entered the slow-motion version of death. If your town is wealthy, or more accurately, if someone wealthy once felt guilty, there might be a leprosarium waiting for you. The name sounds medical, maybe even clinical. But don't get your hopes up. This is not a hospital. It's not even a proper house. It's more like a holding pen. An awkward, lopsided structure made of wood, patched up with whatever was lying around at the time. Stone, moss, prayers. A few narrow cots. A fireplace if you're lucky. A roof that leaks just enough to remind you God's still watching. The place isn't there to heal you. It's there to keep you away. You're not a patient. You're a problem, one with a bed. And if your town doesn't have a leper house, then congratulations, you're going full wilderness mode. You're given permission, granted really, like a royal favor, to go live in the woods. Not in a cabin. Not in a village of lepers. Just away. Build a shack. Carve a hole. Find shelter between the roots of an old tree. Whatever you make will be your new home, assuming the locals don't decide it's too close and burn it down out of a sudden burst of piety. This is your new address. Out of sight. Out of town. Out of mind. And yet, even out here, you're not alone. Because medieval society had its own twisted sense of mercy. You may be unwanted, but you're not entirely abandoned. Other lepers gather too. Maybe 5. Maybe 50. Depending on the size of the town, the generosity of a noble, or the moral panic of the moment. Together you form a sort of non-community. A collection of people who all carry the same invisible sign, leave us be. But not too much. There's no joy in these leper settlements. No festivals. No weddings. Just a lot of silence. And groaning. And the slow shuffle of people trying to move joints that don't respond anymore. You don't talk much at first. You don't need to. Everyone here already knows the story. They lived it too. You're not special. You're just next. There are rules here too. Because even exile has paperwork. Most leper houses were funded by religious institutions. Which means a monk or priest might be assigned to your colony. Not to care for you. Not exactly. They're there to observe. To make sure the property stays holy enough to keep the town's sins at bay. To recite prayers over the dying. To collect alms and distribute them in ways that often feel more symbolic than practical. Sometimes they bring food. Other times they bring rules. No speaking during prayer. No sexual contact. No entering nearby villages. No direct eye contact with visitors. You're still technically under God's watchful eye. You're just in His peripheral vision now. And then there's the work. Yes, work. Because even in exile, you're expected to do something. If your hands still function, you might be tasked with tending gardens, mending robes, or helping bury the dead. Not out of productivity, but practicality. Lepers die slowly. But they still die. And someone has to clean up. Sometimes that someone is you. You dig the hole. You wrap the body. You say the prayer. You look down into the dirt and wonder who'll do it for you when your time comes. Because there's no undertaker here. Just undertakers in waiting. Night is the worst. During the day, you can pretend there's still a system. There's sunlight. There's routine. There are birds. But at night, it's just you and the truth. The cold settles in. The coughs get louder. The moans of those too weak to move echo through thin wooden walls. You can't ignore them. You don't try to. Sometimes someone screams. Sometimes they don't wake up at all. And every morning you wonder if it's your turn. The townsfolk don't visit, of course. They send offerings. Food. Maybe some coins. Delivered by servants or dropped off at a safe distance like cursed Amazon packages. Sometimes children sneak to the edge of the colony out of curiosity. They giggle. They whisper. They dare each other to throw a rock at your door. You don't blame them. You barely remember what childhood feels like anymore. You smile from the shadows, hoping they never get close enough to see your face. You learn the rhythm of the place. The scratching. The coughing. The prayers. You memorize the different types of silence. There's the silence of hunger, tight and bitter. The silence of mourning, flat and final. And the silence of waiting. Because that's what most of your time becomes. Waiting for food. Waiting for pain. Waiting for your turn to be the one in the corner bed no one talks about. There are no clocks here. Just decay. Slow, patient, intimate. Sometimes you see people you knew. A relative, maybe. A friend. A neighbor. They don't stop. They don't speak. But you know them by their walk. their shape. And sometimes, just sometimes, they leave a loaf of bread or a bit of cloth on a nearby stone. They don't wave. They don't smile. But they came. And that's enough. It's not love. Not anymore. But it's not hatred either. It's memory. And in a place like this, memory is mercy. And then one day, the impossible happens. A new arrival. You hear the bell first. Then the crunch of feet. And there they are, wide-eyed, pale, trembling. Still clinging to hope like it's a rope that hasn't snapped yet. You know that look. It was yours. You give them your seat. You give them a blanket. You lie and say it's not so bad. You don't do it to be cruel. You do it because everyone deserves one more day of hope before it breaks. You do it because kindness is the only thing the disease hasn't taken from you yet. Life in exile doesn't kill you fast. It kills you slowly. One toe at a time. One friend at a time. One ritual humiliation at a time. But in between the cracks, between the prayers and the moans and the scratching, you find something strange. Not peace. Not forgiveness. But a kind of quiet. The kind that lets you look up at the stars and remember that before the diagnosis, before the bell, before the exile, you were a person. You loved. You laughed. You had a name. And maybe, just maybe, that still counts for something. The dress code for the damned, and everyone's supposed to stare. So, you're not quite alive, not quite dead. You live in the in-between now. A damp hut at the edge of society, a bowl for alms, a bell for a voice, and a group of fellow ghosts wrapped in cloaks that say, "We used to be people too." And tonight, let's talk about those cloaks. Let's talk about what you wear. Because if you thought exile meant blending into the trees and fading away quietly, you're in for a very specific kind of humiliation. Because lepers? They weren't just separated. They were labeled. Let's rewind for a second. Before the diagnosis, you probably owned maybe 2 garments. Maybe. A coarse wool tunic, a rope belt, a hood if you were lucky. Nothing fancy. But it was yours. It smelled like you. It held the shape of your body, your life, your work. But once you were declared unclean, that changed immediately. Your old clothes were either burned, thrown away, or kept by the church. They couldn't risk them touching anything clean. And in their place, you're given something new. Not a uniform. A warning. The leper's cloak wasn't made for warmth. It wasn't tailored for dignity. It wasn't meant to last, or even to fit. It was rough. It was coarse. It was dyed the color of ashes, or worse, black. The kind of black that sucked the light out of your skin. It hung heavy, not like armor, but like a sentence. A slow, dragging weight of fabric soaked in superstition. The sleeves were long, the hood low. But the most important feature? Visibility. Because the point wasn't to keep you warm. It was to make sure everyone could see you coming. In some towns, lepers were required to sew a distinctive mark onto their garments. A patch. A cross. A symbol of their status. Not a holy cross for salvation, mind you. A branding. Right over the chest, or sewn onto the back, big, visible, and unmistakable. It told everyone what you were before you even opened your mouth. Imagine walking around with a flashing neon sign that says, "Outcast. Contagion. Sin." Except this one can't be turned off. It's stitched into your identity. Even your shoes weren't safe. Some towns mandated mismatched footwear. Yes. on purpose. Not because fashion was having a moment, but so that if you left footprints, muddy, wet, dusty, they would be recognizable as yours. A trail of asymmetrical shame baked into the road. People could say, "A leper came this way," without ever seeing your face, because your very steps were considered offensive. And if that sounds like paranoia, that's because it was. But in the Middle Ages, paranoia had liturgical approval. Now let's talk about gloves. Or as they were known then, modesty mittens for the spiritually contagious. If you had fingers left, you wore gloves. Often crude ones. Sometimes just cloth wrappings, like a bandage that never came off. Why? Because no one wanted to see the signs. The clawed hands. The missing nails. The shriveled skin. And if you didn't cover them, you might be fined. Or whipped. Or chased with sticks by local children looking for something to feel powerful about. If you had no fingers left, well, that was its own kind of silence. You wrapped the stumps in cloth. You learned to ring the bell with your arm, or with a stick tied to your wrist. You learned to eat with one hand, or none. You learned not to ask for help, because the cloak wasn't just a mark. It was a muzzle. It whispered to others, "Don't touch. Don't look. Don't help." And here's the real kicker. Even among lepers, clothing created a hierarchy. If your cloak was still mostly intact, if your cross patch hadn't faded, if your hood wasn't threadbare, you were lucky. New arrivals sometimes showed up with actual linen. The rest of you stared like they were royalty. Because for you, a hole in the cloak meant cold. A missing hood meant exposure. And if your cloak was too ragged, and the townspeople couldn't tell who you were from a distance, that was dangerous. They might assume you were trying to pass as clean, which could get you stoned. Or worse, dragged back to the priest for a correction. This is what shame looks like, sewn into fabric. This is what it means to carry your exile on your back. You don't get to be invisible. You don't even get to be anonymous. You get to be a warning. A walking, rotting sermon. Your clothing isn't yours anymore. It's a costume designed to make people cross the street. A theater of suffering, performed daily. And then, one day, the cloak becomes more than just cloth. It becomes comfort. You pull the hood lower. You wrap the sleeves tighter. Because under that ragged fabric, at least you're hidden. At least your face doesn't make someone scream. At least your neighbors in the leper house don't look at you with pity. They look at you like kin. Like a fellow costume wearer in a world that stopped handing out masks. And you realize something. You're not just wearing shame. You're wearing armor. Worn thin. Threadbare. But still there. You begin to see patterns. The newer ones arrive with cloaks still stiff, still smelling like the church storeroom. You help them adjust the hood. You show them how to keep it from blowing off in the wind. You warn them not to walk too close to the village paths, even by accident. You tell them what every leper learns eventually. This is the skin society lets you keep. They nod. They pull the cloak tighter. And they understand. One day, you dream of being clean. Not cured. Just invisible. You dream of walking through a market with no bell, no clapper, no cloak. You pick up fruit. You touch bread. You lean against a wall. No one notices. And in the dream you cry, not because you're happy, but because being ignored would be such a gift. Because being forgettable would be freedom. But then you wake up. You put on the cloak. And you remember. This is the only freedom you have left. Part 5. Leper houses. Less. Care facility. More. Waiting room for death. Let's step back inside the leper house. Not that you ever left it, really. Not physically. Not spiritually. Because once you're in, you're in. There's no discharge. No. Get well soon. Parchment. No healed leper story that doesn't end in suspicious death or miracle level PR. This isn't a hospital. It's a holding pattern. And what exactly are you being held for? A slow expiration date, written in sores. Now, if you're lucky, or rather, if some long-dead noble felt particularly sinful one Lent, you've found yourself in a decent leper house. Stone walls. A roof with only minor leaks. A single hearth in the middle to fight off the chill of damp bones. There are beds. Cots, really? Simple frames of wood and straw. You claim one, like a refugee claiming shoreline after a shipwreck. It doesn't have your name. Nothing does anymore. But it's yours until your body says otherwise. There's no privacy here. Everyone coughs in unison. Moans in rhythm. Prays in whispers like they're afraid even God has stopped listening. If you're not lucky, then you get a ruin. A splintered barn, converted sometime in the past century with more optimism than carpentry. Holes in the roof. Wind like a sermon of despair. Mice that look at you like rivals. The bedding is damp. The walls sweat. Someone once nailed a crude cross above the door, but it hangs crooked, as if it couldn't quite bring itself to bless the place. There are no attendants. No monks. No visits. This is an exile with support. It's abandonment with a porch. And yet, people keep coming. New arrivals. Familiar expressions. Some try to joke. Some cry. Most just sit. Because once you're here, there's a script. No one says, "Welcome." That would imply something worth arriving to. They just scoot over. Make room on the bench. Share the broth. Offer a corner of dry cloth like it's treasure. And you understand, immediately, that me kindness here isn't a gesture. It's survival. So what's the day today? Think monastery. But sick. And sad. And short-staffed. You rise at dawn, if sleep found you at all. You pray. Not for healing. You're past that. You pray for a good death. Or at least a quiet one. If there's food, it comes from the town. Not freshly delivered. Left. Abandoned. A sack of barley. A crust of bread. Occasionally wine, which is as much for disinfecting as drinking. You take turns preparing meals. Boiling water. Dividing portions. No one hoards. Not because you're saints. Because you all know what it feels like to be on the edge. Then comes work, if your limbs allow it. Tending what's left of a garden. Cleaning the latrine. Washing linens with hands that can't feel the cold anymore. There are chores for everyone. If you're not dead, you're useful. That's the motto, though no one says it aloud. When someone gets too weak to help, they sit by the door, wrapped in layers, watching light move across dirt like it might mean something. When they stop coming to the door, you know it's time to start digging. Funerals are simple. There's no priest. Sometimes someone mumbles the pater noster. Other times, it's just silence. The body is wrapped. Not in linen, too expensive, but in whatever cloth can be spared. You carry them out. Together. Slowly. and you place them in the ground like planting something you know won't grow. There's no marker, no last words, no legacy. Just a shallow grave, a handful of dirt, and a space on the bench that stays empty. And then life just continues, which is somehow worse, because it doesn't stop. The sun rises, the bell rings, the coughs start. You keep eating, praying, digging, mourning. It becomes a rhythm, not a tragedy. And somewhere along the way, you realize this is it. This is the rest of your life. This is the place where time slows down just enough for you to feel every single thing you've lost. And yet, in this broken, breathless corner of the world, there are moments. Moments when someone sings, quietly, off-key, a song remembered from childhood. The kind that makes everyone stop, just for a second, and remember they were loved once. There are moments when someone laughs. Not because anything is funny, but because absurdity still works here. Like when the soup turns purple because someone mistook berries for beets. Or when a rat steals a boot, and everyone debates whether it was divine punishment or divine comedy. There's even joy. Small, fleeting, but real. A letter arrives, rare, but not unheard of. Someone's sister still writes. A brother sneaks bread. A child draws a picture of a tree. You hold the scrap of parchment like it's relic. You reread it until the ink fades. Because for one tiny second, someone out there remembered you existed. And in a life defined by erasure, that's everything. But joy here doesn't last. Not because it's stolen. Because it's too heavy. Hope has weight. It drags on the sick like an anchor. You learn to put it down. You learn to smile without believing things will get better. Not because you're bitter. Because it's safer. You tell yourself you're at peace. Because the alternative is remembering what you lost. And your memory? That's the one part of you still fully intact. Visitors don't come. Not unless a bishop makes a show of mercy, or a noblewoman decides to earn indulgences by handing out stale biscuits from a covered cart. They arrive with veils, with gloves, with too much perfume. They speak in soft, sad tones like your statues in a church. And then they leave. Quickly. Because the smell lingers. The guilt clings. And charity, as it turns out, has a time limit. You do have religion, though. Of course you do. The chapel, if there is one, is the one place no one pretends. There's no showy faith here. No pomp. No incense. Just a broken cross nailed to a damp wall, and a candle that barely holds a flame. You pray not for miracles. You stopped doing that long ago. You pray for silence. For numbness. For the strength to go one more day without wishing you hadn't. And in this worn-down world of rot and resignation, you meet others who show you how to keep going. They don't lecture. They don't preach. They just sit next to you. Quiet. Present. They wrap a spare blanket around your shoulders when you cough. They save you the best part of the bread, the crust. They hold your hand, even when it's shaking. Even when it's barely a hand anymore. And they call you by your name. Your real name. The one you thought was gone. This, you realize, is love. Not the kind they write songs about. Not the kind they celebrate with wine and dancing. But the kind that shows up when no one else will. The kind that doesn't flinch when your skin peels. The kind that doesn't keep a bell between you and kindness. This is the kind of love that grows in ruins. that blooms in graveyards, that says, you still matter, even here. So far, we've covered the exile, the clothing, the shame, the slow decay. But there's another part of being a medieval leper that cuts deeper than any sore or stigma. It's the part no one talks about in sermons. The part that comes in silence, in absence. Tonight we talk about goodbyes. Not the loud, tearful kind. Not the kind with embraces or promises to write. But the kind that happen while you're still standing there. The kind where people stop looking you in the eye, one glance at a time. At first, when you're diagnosed, there's still a chance, just a flicker, that people will stay. Your spouse stands a little apart. Your kids don't quite understand. Your friends offer prayers. But already you can see it. The space growing between you. The nervous glances. The edge in their voices. The careful way they pass you bread, like they're feeding a dog that might bite. You tell yourself it's temporary. That love will be stronger than fear. But this isn't a movie. This is the 13th century. And in the 13th century, leprosy isn't just illness. It's uncleanness. It's the body made into metaphor. A physical manifestation of sin, of shame, of something you probably deserved. And love, in this world, has limits. The first real goodbye usually comes quietly. Someone who used to stop by your house every evening just doesn't. A cousin who used to share jokes at the market suddenly finds a different stall. Your child asks if you're still safe. You say yes even if you don't believe it. You lie. Because the truth is too heavy for their small hands. Your spouse tries. They really do. They bring you food. They leave it on the ground. They come to see you at the edge of the path, but they don't cross it. You reach out once. Instinct. And they flinch. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for you to remember, you're not someone they can touch anymore. You're not someone they're allowed to love the same way anymore. Not publicly. Not closely. Not with skin. Then the priest reminds them of their duty to stay pure. That contact with you could mean excommunication. Or sickness. Or worse, their children being associated with yours. And the visit slow. Not out of cruelty. Out of fatigue. Because loving you now means walking a tightrope in public and crying in private. And most people? They're not built for that. So one by one, the threads snap. The friends who used to call your name, now lower their eyes. The neighbor who once lent you tools, now locks the shed. The village children stop asking if you'll come to the feast. You weren't uninvited. You just stopped existing. And you watch it happen in real time. The way people erase you without raising a hand. Sometimes someone tries to resist it. A sister. A brother. Someone stubborn. They sneak out to see you. Bring news. A piece of cloth. A memory. You talk like nothing's wrong. You laugh like nothing's changed. But when they go, they scrub their hands raw. They tell no one they came. They love you still, but they fear what that love might cost. And so eventually, even they stop coming. But you don't get angry. That's the strange part. You understand. Because they're still in the world of the living. And you're not. You're the future they're afraid of. The reflection they don't want to see. The lesson their children are warned about. You begin to speak less. Not out of bitterness. But because there's no one left to answer. You stop using names. You stop asking questions that require memories. You learn to tell stories in fragments. Not, "My wife once made the best bread," but, "There was a time when I tasted something soft." Not, "My son was 12 when I left," but, "There was a boy once. I think he liked birds." It hurts less that way. When people are just shapes in a memory. Some nights, though, it comes back. All at once. The dinner table. The laughter. The tiny arguments about soup. The sound of your name said with love. And you ache in places the disease hasn't touched. Places no bell can warn away. A few people write letters. Short ones. Scared ones. "We hope you are well. We pray for your soul. God has a purpose in all things." You don't blame them. It's hard to write to someone who already feels dead. And then, someday, there's a knock at the edge of your leper house. Someone new. Pale. Quiet. Familiar. They say your name, but differently. Like they've practiced it in their head 100 times. And you realize it's your son. Older now. Thinner. And for a second you forget the rules. You step forward. And he steps back. Not in fear. Out of training. Out of years spent being told you were a shadow to avoid. He doesn't hug you. He doesn't cry. He just leaves a small pouch on the ground. And says, "I remembered you." That's it. Then he walks away. You don't stop him. You don't cry until the sun goes down. Because in that moment you understand. Being remembered hurts more than being forgotten. But you don't let the others see. You fold the pouch. You sit back on the bench. And you wait for the next cough. The next prayer. The next goodbye that doesn't sound like one. Because in the leper house, people disappear one heartbeat at a time. You learn not to hold on. You learn not to hope for reunions. Only memories that don't rot. Some lepers die screaming. Some die in sleep. Some die during prayer, with the name of someone they loved still on their lips. The others? They bury them. Wrap them. Speak a name out loud one last time. And then, silence. Another seat empty. Another goodbye the world doesn't notice. But here's the strange part. You don't feel alone. Not anymore. Because even in this place of echoes and rot and sorrow, you are surrounded by others who lost everything and still give. A hand, a smile, a piece of cloth. A reminder that even the most cursed are still capable of kindness. This, you learn, is the truest form of love. Not the kind that shows up when things are good, but the kind that remains, even after everything else has left. A hand on your shoulder when your nerves are gone. A voice calling your name when the rest of the world forgot it. A goodbye that feels like a beginning. By now, you've learned to let go. Of family. Of normality. Of the idea that you'll ever again be called by your name without someone flinching. But you haven't let go of one thing. Hunger. Because leprosy doesn't kill your appetite. It just makes satisfying it a lot more complicated. And so today we take a slow, aching walk into the legal, spiritual, and emotional mess that is begging, leper edition. Let's be clear, begging was a job. A sanctioned, structured role in society. You weren't just some desperate figure on the roadside. You were a licensed desperate figure on the roadside. In fact, many towns issued actual written permits to their local lepers. Parchments sealed and signed by town councils or religious orders, authorizing them to beg, legally, within specific zones. You could show it to the guards, to merchants, to priests, not to earn their respect, but to say, "Yes, I am officially allowed to exist here. Just long enough to take your crusts and leave." Of course, the permit didn't guarantee kindness. It didn't stop people from sneering or throwing scraps instead of placing them gently. But it did stop people from accusing you of breaking the law just by standing near their doorway. It made your suffering official, a recognized part of the social structure, a category, like butcher, miller, leper. So you prepare yourself for the day. You wrap your legs, your feet, your face. You tie the clapper to your wrist, or hold your little bell. You adjust your hood low, not to hide, but to spare others the sight. You bring your bowl, a simple one, wooden, maybe chipped, not too big. That would be presumptuous. It's a bowl for humility, not for fullness. You approach the town with your permit tucked in your sleeve, your heart drumming like a funeral dirge. You don't enter the gates. You don't have to. The townsfolk know you're there. You're not just a person. You're a warning, wearing a patchy cloak and making noise. You find your usual place. The rock under the elm tree. The one where the dirt's been pressed smooth from years of knees. You kneel. You ring the bell. You lower your head. And then, you wait. The sun moves. People pass. Some glance. Some cross the road. A few whisper prayers. Fewer still stop. And when they do, they don't hand you the bread. They drop it. Into your bowl. Or onto the ground. No eye contact. No conversation. Just gravity, doing what kindness won't. Children are less subtle. They stare. Ask questions. Sometimes too loud. Why does he look like that? Why can't he come in? Their mothers pull them away. Some mutter apologies. Others cross themselves like you might curse them with a blink. You smile anyway. Because even a child's question feels closer to real human contact than most things you get. Now and then, a monk appears, carrying leftover food from the abbey. He reads a passage of scripture while handing out hunks of bread like blessings. He doesn't touch you. He wears gloves. He looks at you like you're a sad parable. And you nod. You say thank you? Because even performative kindness is better than none. You get used to humiliation. It becomes as routine as prayer. You time your bell to ring softly, rhythmically. A sound people associate with something sad but manageable. You don't shout. You don't gesture. You just kneel. You learn which houses leave scraps, and which ones leave stones. You learn which baker drops day-old loaves behind the wall when no one's looking. You learn to survive on memory, habit, and whatever people can spare without guilt. Some days you eat well. A loaf. A dried apple. A bit of cheese with the mold scraped off. You bring some back for the others, those too weak to beg. You share it around the hearth like it's a feast. And for a few minutes, you almost feel human again. Until the food's gone. And the quiet returns. On bad days, there is nothing. The weather is cruel. The roads are empty. Or worse, the town is celebrating something. A feast. A saint's day. A wedding. Events where joy is mandatory, and your presence would ruin the aesthetic. No one wants a leper ringing a bell during a bridal procession, so you stay farther away. You try not to hear the music, and you wait for someone's conscience to outweigh their appetite. Sometimes someone talks to you, not a priest, not a clerk, A stranger. Maybe drunk. Maybe lonely. They say, "What did you do to deserve this?" You smile. You say, "Nothing. Just lived." They shake their head. Not in disbelief. In recognition. Then they leave you a coin. You keep it hidden. Carefully. Because money makes people look at you differently. And you've learned that isn't always a good thing. And what if you don't want to beg? What if the shame becomes too much? What if your knees give out and your voice won't come? Well, that's where the rules get cruel. Because your food doesn't just arrive. You are expected to make yourself visible. To be seen suffering. The town feeds its lepers not out of generosity, but out of obligation. And an invisible leper doesn't inspire guilt. So you must ring the bell. Hold the bowl. Endure the stares. Because vanishing doesn't feed you. And pride? Pride doesn't buy turnips. And so the cycle continues. You kneel. You beg. You eat. You return. And when you get back to the leper house, the others ask, "How was it?" And you say, "Quiet." Because quiet is the only honest answer. It means you survived. It means you were ignored but not attacked. It means you found enough bread to fill half a stomach and a few scraps of dignity. You don't cry anymore. Not for yourself. Not in public. Crying takes energy. And eyes that still work. And people to notice. You save your tears for the nights when the wind doesn't howl and there's no one left to see. That's when the begging finally ends. Not because you're fed, but because you're exhausted. You lie down, cloak still wrapped, bowl at your side. And you wonder, did anyone recognize you? Did they see a person? Or just another bell-shaped burden, cleared from the road like yesterday's bad omen? You dream of bread. And hands. Not dropping food. But holding yours. No fear. No gloves. Just warmth. By now, you've lived through exile, erasure, and endless echoing silence. You've lost your home, your name, and most of your face. And still, you haven't lost your faith. Not entirely. Because this is the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, God is everywhere. In the sky. In the bread. In the disease crawling through your bones. You pray. Not because you expect a miracle, but because it's all you've got left. Prayer is your last tether to meaning. A kind of spiritual muscle memory. You fold your hands, or what's left of them, and whisper words that used to comfort you. But now, the words taste different. Hollow. Thin. Because if God is everywhere, why is He silent here? Let's go back to when it all began. When the priest first declared you unclean. It wasn't a medical diagnosis. It was a spiritual one. A judgment. The church didn't see leprosy as a disease. It saw it as punishment. According to most sermons at the time, lepers were the living proof of divine justice. You were sick because God wanted you to be. Maybe for your sins. Maybe for your parents. Maybe for reasons no one understands but everyone's afraid to question. You were walking theology. A living parable in a world where illness wasn't biological. It was moral. That changes how people see you. But worse, it changes how you see yourself. You don't just hurt. You feel guilty for hurting. You wonder what you did. Which prayer you skipped. Which thought you had that made God turn His face away. You think back to everything you regret. Every fight. Every lie. Every moment of selfishness. And you wonder, Was that the moment my skin began to rot? The church doesn't help. At least, not at first. They offer prayers, sermons, pity. But touch? Rare. Real advocacy? Almost non-existent. Because touching a leper meant more than physical danger. It meant risking spiritual contamination. Even priests flinched. They believed your disease could stain their soul. Still, you go to chapel. If your leper house has one. It's small, damp, smells like wax and mildew. There's a crucifix on the wall. You stare at it, long and hard. At his wounds, his broken body. And you wonder, honestly, if Jesus would sit beside you now. Or if even he would keep a safe distance. Sometimes, a monk visits. Young, nervous, pious. He speaks of redemption, suffering, God's plan. He quotes the book of Job, says you're being tested, says your pain is a mirror of Christ's, that your rod is holy, that the world may hate you, but heaven is watching. You try to believe him. You really do. But then he leaves. And you're still here. And the sores still itch. And your breath still stinks of infection. And your neighbor died in her sleep with no candle, no comfort, no sound. You want to ask him, is that holiness too? There are whispers of saints who touched lepers. Saint Francis, Saint Martin, Saint Damien, though he's not born yet. They're held up as heroes. But for every one saint who touched a leper, there were 100 who looked away. You tell yourself it's okay. You don't need miracles. You just need someone to look at you without flinching. To treat your soul like it's still intact. Even if your skin isn't. But you're not always so lucky. Because sometimes, religion cuts instead of heals. A traveling preacher stops by one day. Tall, loud, red-faced. He doesn't speak to you. He speaks about you. Points at your hovel, your clapper, your face. Calls you a symbol of judgment. Says your suffering should be a lesson to others. Says lepers are God's punishment made flesh. You stare at the dirt. You say nothing. But later that night you cry. Not from shame. From exhaustion. Because you're tired of being a lesson. You want to be a person again. And yet, something keeps you praying. Something deep. Something stubborn. Something like hope. You pray for sleep. For strength. For enough breath to make it through the next sunrise. You pray not to be healed, but to be seen. And maybe, just maybe, to be forgiven. Even if you don't know what for. Then one day, something happens. A priest visits your leper house. Older. Stern. Quiet. He walks in like he's not afraid. He sits beside you. Not far away. Beside. He doesn't preach. He doesn't flinch. He listens. And after a long silence he says, I see no sin in your face. Only suffering. It breaks you. Not loudly. Just a quiet, shaking breath. Because someone finally said the words you've been aching to hear. He brings communion. Not from a distance. In your hands. He touches your fingers. He blesses your forehead. And for the first time in years, you feel human again. He tells you something else. That God isn't punishing you. That sometimes suffering just is. No reason. No divine scorekeeping. Just brokenness in a broken world. He tells you your prayers still matter. Your soul is still yours. And that heaven isn't closed to you. You thank him. You don't stop crying for hours. The next day, he's gone, replaced by another priest. You never see him again. Maybe he got transferred. Maybe he got in trouble. Maybe he just did what he could. But you remember him. Every word. Every gesture. And now when you pray, you believe it counts. Not because the sores have gone. They haven't. Not because the world treats you better. It doesn't. But because for a moment, someone looked at you and didn't see a punishment. They saw a person. And that's faith. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that shouts from pulpits or fills cathedrals. But the quiet kind. The kind that survives under a rotting roof, in a body that no longer works. The kind that whispers, God hasn't forgotten you, even if everyone else has. Let's talk about what it means to be alive, but not really. Because leprosy didn't kill you quickly. It didn't strike you down like the plague, or break you like famine, or bleed you out like war. It did something worse. It left you hanging in a long, painful pause between life and death. A sentence without a period. You were still breathing, still moving, still praying. But to the world around you, you were gone. Not dead enough for a funeral. Not healthy enough to matter. You lived in the margins of law and memory, a space where society could forget you without technically killing you. You weren't a person anymore. You were a legal category, a condition, a thing that once was. When you were declared a leper, they didn't just send you away. They performed a ritual. We talked about it before, the mass of separation. But here's the part we didn't mention. It mimicked a funeral. A priest led prayers over you, dressed in black. You knelt at the altar, and they said goodbye. Not to your soul, but to your place in the world. They sprinkled dirt on your feet, symbolically buried you, and then told you to leave. You weren't allowed to return. Not to your village. Not to your family. Not to your name. Because your name? It stopped being yours the moment you rang that bell. In some records, if you were recorded at all, you were listed not by your birth name, but by your diagnosis. Thomas the leper. Agnes of the bell. Unnamed, unclean. Even in documents, you were an afterthought. If someone took over your farm, your house, your life, the paperwork rarely included you. You weren't dead. But the law acted like you were. And if you did try to come back, to walk into town, to knock on a door, to visit a church, there were punishments. Not always violent. Sometimes it was just public shaming. Sometimes a fine you couldn't pay. Sometimes a beating. Because society didn't care what you wanted. They only cared that you stayed in your place. You couldn't own property anymore. Not really. You couldn't marry. You couldn't enter contracts. You couldn't testify in court. You couldn't serve as a witness, even if you saw a crime. Why? Because your presence was considered spiritually polluted. You were treated like a ghost with skin. An inconvenience still taking up air. You could be robbed. And no one would help you. You could be beaten. And people would look away. And if you died, the world would barely notice. Unless someone had to bury you. Then it was briefly a problem. And then? Forgotten. There were rules for your burial too. You weren't buried in the main cemetery. That was for the faithful. The clean. The blessed. You got the margins. a grave outside the walls. Sometimes unmarked. Sometimes shallow. Sometimes dug by people just as sick as you. You didn't get a procession. You didn't get a eulogy. Just dirt. Silence. Maybe a whispered prayer. And if, by some miracle, you recovered, which did happen, rarely, in cases of misdiagnosis or spontaneous remission, you still weren't welcome back. People doubted you. They said your disease was just dormant. They accused you of hiding your sores. They assumed you were lying. You were damaged goods, spiritually and socially. Even health couldn't clean your reputation. You'd been marked. And in medieval Europe, that mark was for life. So you learned to live like a ghost. You moved quietly. You expected nothing. You watched the world from the edge. You saw children grow into strangers. You saw seasons change without celebration. You saw people age who had once held you. And all the while, you stayed the same. Not by choice, but by erasure. Some lepers went years, decades, without ever hearing their names spoken with kindness. Some lived longer in exile than they ever had in society. Imagine that. Spending more time forgotten than remembered. More time invisible than known. More time dead than alive, while still waking up every morning. That's not life. That's a sentence. And you don't get parole. But here's the twist. Here's the miracle. Here's the thing they didn't expect. You adapt. Not because you're strong. Not because you're saintly. But because you're human. Because even ghosts crave company. And even the erased can build something from the silence. In your little leper house, with your little fire, and your fading voice, you find people. Other unpersons. Other almost corpses. And you laugh. Not often. Not loudly. But when you do, it feels like resurrection. You share stories. You remember old songs. You sit in the sun and talk about nothing. And in those moments, you're alive again. Not in law. Not in name. But in spirit. And maybe, just maybe, that's what mattered all along. Not the titles. Not the property. Not the parish records or the funeral rites. But the fact that someone knew you. That someone saw you. That someone still called you by the name you thought had died. So you keep going. Not because you expected to get better. But because someone else is watching. Someone newer. Someone just diagnosed. And they're scared. And they think they're already dead. And you take their hand. If you still have one. And you say, "You're still here." That counts. And maybe it does. Maybe that's enough. Maybe being alive, even in pieces, is still worth something. You always knew it would end like this. Not because you're a pessimist, but because you've been watching it happen for years, one breath at a time, one name at a time. Everyone around you has already left. Some quietly, some in pain, some without a sound. Now, it's your turn. There is no panic, no crowds, no weeping procession. Just the stillness of late morning. The sound of birds too busy with their own lives to care. You lie in your cot, what's left of it? Your body? It's more memory than flesh. Your fingers curl without you asking. Your voice doesn't come when you call it. Your breath is a reluctant guest, drifting in, pausing, leaving again. But your mind? Still there. Still wandering. You think about the old days. Before the sores. Before the bell. Before you were a symbol, a sentence, a warning. You remember the feel of a child's hand, the sound of bread crust cracking between teeth, the weight of your name, spoken with love. You don't cry. You did that years ago. Tears are a luxury you learn to ration, like food, like hope. Instead, you breathe, slow, hollow, and you listen to the wind outside your leper house, to the quiet cough of someone nearby, to the sound of silence trying not to wake the dead. No one knows today is your day. There is no priest scheduled, no family gathered, no grave dug yet. You didn't get a last meal, just a crust of yesterday's bread, softened in broth. But that's fine. It's enough. Because you've learned. It was never about the grand exit. It was always about who stayed with you when nothing else did. You feel a hand. Not in a dream. A real hand. Gentle. Shaking. Rough with age. It's one of the others. The quiet one who used to hum at night. She says nothing. Just holds your arm. And you know she knows that this is the moment. You try to speak. Not a farewell. Not a prayer. Just a name. Hers. You say it, barely. And she smiles. Because it's the only gift you can give now. Recognition. The reminder that even in death, someone else existed beside you. And then, you exhale. Once. Twice. Gone. No lightning. No angels. Just stillness. They bury you that afternoon. The others dig the grave. Not because they were told. Because they want to. Because you matter to them. Even if no one else cared. Even if the world forgot your face, your name, your story. They didn't. There's no priest. No incense. No gold-threaded robe. Just the smell of earth. The weight of dirt. The shape of silence, carved in the wind. They wrap you gently. In the cloak you wore for years. The same one that marked you. That humiliated you. That sheltered you. It becomes your shroud. And somehow, that feels right. Someone says a prayer. Not perfect. Stumbled. But true. And when they speak your name, your real name, it rings louder than any bell you ever carried. They cover you. One handful of earth at a time. And as they work, they hum. Not a hymn. A tune. The kind sung at harvest time. The kind sung when life felt simple and the sky wasn't always gray. It's not a funeral song. But maybe that's the point. Maybe your death isn't a tragedy. Maybe it's a release. Because even though the world erased you, you left something behind. Not land. Not money. Not legacy. Just memory. A face. A voice. A kindness in a world that tried so hard to take it from you. Your grave has no marker. Just a patch of earth, slightly smoother than the rest. But to the others? It's sacred. They sit near it when the days are warm. They speak your name now and then. They remember your laugh. Your stubbornness. The way you saved them the good part of the bread. You're not a ghost. You're a story. And in this forgotten corner of the world, that's everything. You weren't a lesson. You weren't a punishment. You weren't a warning. You were a person. And even in exile, even in shame, you never stopped being one. That's how the story ends. Not with pity, but with peace. And maybe that's the greatest rebellion of all. To be remembered with love. In a world that tried to forget you.